Millionaire left his pregnant wife after Mistress gave him an ultimatum. She took it all back. Picture this: a once happy marriage on the brink, a newly pregnant wife praying for her husband's devotion, and a charming mistress willing to do anything, absolutely anything, to keep him for herself. A single ultimatum sets off a chain of events more devastating than any of them could have imagined. The choices made in the heat of passion unleash betrayal, heartbreak, and a hunger for revenge that burns hotter than a desert sun. And as karma tightens its grip, no one escapes unscathed. This is a story of love turned sour, secrets exposed, and the unexpected twists that can only happen in real life. David Carter was known around Redwood City as the reliable, thoughtful man who always kept his promises. For years, he was the first to volunteer at local charity events and sponsor youth sports teams. He was praised by churchgoers on Sundays for his warm hugs and easy smiles. He had married the bright-eyed and compassionate Sarah Reeves 3 years prior, a wedding that had all the hallmarks of a picture-perfect union. They'd exchanged vows beneath an old oak tree, the entire Reeves clan buzzing with happiness for their beloved Sarah, who had finally found the one. During the early months of their marriage, David's attentiveness shone. He knew Sarah's favorite tea flavor, lavender chamomile, and brought it home without her having to ask. He would send her random text messages just to say he missed her. Their friends teased that they practically invented the concept of newlywed bliss. If a few older friends and relatives seemed skeptical, chalking it up to the honeymoon phase, David and Sarah shrugged it off. But over time, those little details started to fade. David became more distant. Where he used to ask Sarah about her day, he now mumbled his greetings while scrolling through messages on his phone. He claimed work at Redwood Tech Solutions had become overwhelming, which wasn't a complete lie. The tech industry in Redwood City was indeed fast-paced with deadlines that moved like quicksand. Still, something else was brewing under the surface. Sarah could sense it each time David's phone buzzed after midnight, or when he began disappearing into the garage to take private calls. The real shift happened on a damp evening in early spring, shortly after Sarah discovered she was pregnant. She felt queasy from the smell of leftover pizza, yet floated on an inexplicable excitement about having a baby. One glance at David's face when she told him the news, however, and a razor-sharp reality pricked at her heart. He looked stunned, but not entirely pleased. In fact, he looked downright panicked. That same week, David found reasons to be out of the house more often. He mentioned late-night work meetings, an abrupt business trip, or the need to clear his head by going for a drive along the winding cliff-lined roads to Half Moon Bay. Sarah felt her stomach churn with nerves. She was certain an invisible wall was erecting between them. Although she had no proof, the suspicion that her once devoted husband was hiding something grew stronger each day, and soon she would know exactly what it was. The day Sarah realized her suspicions were more than paranoid, imaginings began innocently enough. She had a morning doctor's appointment to confirm her pregnancy. Everything was going smoothly. The heartbeat was strong, and her obstetrician, Dr. Monica Lee, who was also her longtime family friend, assured her the baby was growing beautifully. It should have been a moment of shared joy. But David was absent. Instead of rushing in with flowers or a warm smile, he texted to say he couldn't make it. He offered no explanation beyond urgent meeting. That same afternoon, Sarah returned home to find a small, unfamiliar earring on the floor of their living room. It wasn't hers. She had never worn a pair shaped like tiny golden leaves. At first she tried to rationalize it. A friend's, her mother's. But no female visitors had been in the house recently, and her mother, Harriet Reeves, was allergic to anything but surgical steel. Sarah's mind whirled as she stood there in the silence of their living room, earring in hand. She felt the weight of 1,000 heartbreaks press against her chest. Determined to investigate, Sarah rummaged around for more clues. In the kitchen wastebasket, she found a crumpled receipt from a candlelit dinner for two at Luca's, a high-end Italian restaurant in downtown Redwood City. She remembered that David had been working late the night before. Suddenly, she saw an image in her mind, David gazing at another woman under low-lit chandeliers, clinking wine glasses, while Sarah was at home, struggling with morning sickness in the evening. A confrontation felt inevitable. But Sarah hesitated. She was pregnant, feeling vulnerable, and worried about pushing David further away. Unsure of her next step, she confided in her best friend from high school, Caroline Burns, who now lived in San Francisco. Over the phone, Caroline's voice cracked with concern. "You have to talk to him, Sarah, sooner or later. The truth will come out." That truth arrived like a wrecking ball 3 nights later. David was in the shower, and his phone buzzed on the nightstand. Sarah had never before considered invading his privacy, but desperation overrode everything. She picked up the phone, her heart pounding. The message read, "I'm tired of hiding. Choose me or else Charlotte." Sarah's eyes blurred. She could hardly breathe. She scrolled up slightly and discovered countless messages, stolen kisses described in detail, images of David and Charlotte together, plans to sneak away for weekend trips, the words "I love you, baby" repeated more times than she could stomach. This was the earring's owner, the woman who joined him at Luca's, the one who had captured David's heart, or at least his lust. In an instant, she felt fury, despair, and shock surge through her. When David emerged from the shower wearing only a towel around his waist, he froze upon seeing Sarah holding his phone. For one long, excruciating moment, neither of them spoke. Then Sarah demanded, "Who is Charlotte James? Tell me everything." David's face turned pale. The secret had finally been exposed. In the days following Sarah's discovery, the house grew so tense that even a pin drop would sound like a cannon shot. David barely slept, plagued by guilt and panic. Meanwhile, Sarah wept silently in bed, tears soaking her pillow as she tried to reconcile the man she married with the stranger who now stood before her. A swirl of anguish, resentment, and fear for her unborn child consumed her. Eventually, David relented and confessed he told Sarah that Charlotte James was a colleague at Redwood Tech Solutions, a rising star in the sales department who used her wit and charm to impress potential clients. They had worked together on a project that required late evenings and frequent off-site meetings. One night, after celebrating the successful close of a major deal, the celebratory drinks led to a line crossed that David never intended to cross, or so he claimed. It was a mistake. At first, David said his eyes cast downward as he perched on the edge of their couch, searching for a shred of sympathy. But it just evolved. His words sounded hollow, even to him. He admitted Charlotte had demanded he leave Sarah, threatening to expose their affair to the entire company if he refused. What began as a fling had turned into an entanglement. He felt powerless to end. Sarah's fury turned to icy devastation. She was pregnant, carrying his child. How could he do this to her? She demanded to know if he loved Charlotte, or if it was all just physical. David's stumbling explanation offered no comfort. "I don't know," he muttered. "I got carried away. She's exciting, and everything felt different." The moment the words left his mouth, he realized how pathetic they sounded. In a twisted sense of timing, Charlotte herself decided to make an appearance 2 days later. She sent a message to Sarah's phone, which left Sarah's hands shaking. "I'm giving David until the end of this week to leave you. If he doesn't, I walk and I'll make sure he suffers. He'll lose his job, his reputation, everything." The audacity took Sarah's breath away. She wanted to smash the phone into 1,000 pieces. When she confronted David about this ultimatum, he looked both terrified and oddly intrigued by the possibility of a new life with Charlotte. "She can be ruthless," he admitted. "If I lose my job, how will we manage?" The question hung in the air, as though Sarah was now part of a group deliberation. Suddenly, Sarah felt the world tilt under her feet. She was pregnant, reliant on David's income, and now faced with the possibility that the father of her child was seriously entertaining the mistress's demands. Yet the ultimatum forced David to choose, and whether out of confusion, lust, or some misguided sense of self-preservation, he seemed ready to walk out of the marriage. It was a betrayal that struck Sarah like a physical blow, leaving her dazed and broken. And as the seconds ticked by toward Charlotte's deadline, the tension threatened to explode into a catastrophe none of them could have predicted. The day of decision arrived like a thundercloud looming on the horizon. Dark and foreboding, Charlotte had given David until Friday at 5 p.m. to decide stay with his pregnant wife or run away to her. He spent the week oscillating between guilt-stricken remorse and a reckless kind of excitement at the thought of a fresh start. It was as though a long dormant part of him yearned for something new, no matter how destructive that new might be. For Sarah, the countdown felt like a slow march to the guillotine. Each time she heard footsteps outside the house, her heart raced. She couldn't bring herself to beg him to stay, though deep down she wanted to. She reminded herself that saving a marriage at the cost of her self-respect was no salvation at all. Still, every night she prayed that David would come to his senses. Friday morning dawned, and Redwood City was drenched by a rare, heavy rain. Sarah watched water droplets slide down the kitchen window as David hastily packed a small suitcase. He claimed he was only taking some time to think, but she saw the finality in his eyes. A pit of sorrow opened in her stomach. She would have done almost anything to keep their love alive. But David, it seemed, had already drifted beyond her reach. He paused in the living room, where Sarah stood near the couch, the same spot where he'd confessed his affair. Rain pelted the roof, providing a dramatic soundtrack to the moment he spoke quietly. "I'm sorry for everything. I just can't lose my job. I can't start over, especially now. But Charlotte has a plan. She says I won't lose everything if I'm with her." The words felt like knives to Sarah's heart. He was leaving her for his mistress, not because he confessed to undying love, but out of fear and twisted ambition. Stunned, Sarah stared at his face, searching for the man she once knew. "I'm pregnant." "David," she whispered, "this is your child. Does that mean nothing to you?" Her words hung in the air. Unanswered, David's jaw tensed. He grabbed his suitcase and mumbled a half-hearted apology before walking out the front door. Sarah stood by the window, tears streaming down her cheeks as she watched the man she loved disappear into the downpour. The date was firmly etched in her mind, but April 14th, the day her husband left her and their unborn child for another woman's ultimatum. Sarah sank onto the couch, numb. She found her phone and called her friend, Caroline Burns, sobbing uncontrollably. Meanwhile, in a downtown cafe not far from Redwood Tech Solutions, Charlotte James sipped espresso, glancing at the clock, knowing David would appear any moment. For her, it was the ultimate triumph, a victory that came at the expense of a pregnant wife's heartbreak. But fate has a peculiar sense of justice, and none of them realized just how swift and merciless that justice would be. In the weeks that followed David's departure, Sarah found herself in a kind of emotional freefall. Each morning she woke up to the brutal reminder that her husband was gone, and not just gone, but living a new life with the woman who had taunted her. Despite the sense of betrayal gnawing at her, Sarah knew she couldn't collapse. She had a baby on the way, and that meant forging ahead even if she felt hollow inside. She applied for remote freelance work, tapping into her background in marketing. She needed financial independence, a stable income that didn't rely on David's unpredictable whims. Thankfully, Sarah landed a contract with a small startup based in Portland. It wasn't big money, but it was enough for groceries, rent, and medical bills, if she budgeted carefully. During this time, her mother, Harriet Reeves, flew in from Billings, Montana, to stay with her for a while. Harriet fussed over Sarah, making hearty soups, and reminding her to take her prenatal vitamins. She also offered the motherly support Sarah desperately craved, gentle encouragement and the occasional tough love. Men can be fools, Harriet said, her voice tinged with anger. But you have a life to protect now. Sarah, focus on that baby. Caroline Burns, Sarah's best friend, came by every weekend. The two of them would sit in the backyard, over cups of herbal tea, discussing baby names or reminiscing about their teenage adventures to lighten the mood. You know you're the strongest woman I know. Right, Caroline said one Saturday, patting Sarah's hand. This is a horrible time, but you will come out the other side, stronger than ever. At night, alone in her room, Sarah let her guard down. She'd cry over old photos, snapshots of her and David laughing on their honeymoon in Hawaii, or celebrating birthdays at Redwood City's annual festival. Each memory felt like a small blade cutting into her, yet she also felt a faint sense of resolve growing. She reminded herself that heartbreak didn't define her. Her capacity to heal did. Meanwhile, rumors swirled around Redwood Tech Solutions. A few sympathetic co-workers like Matthew Thompson, who lived in Glendale, Arizona but worked remotely, reached out to Sarah. He confirmed what she had suspected. David and Charlotte had moved in together, parading their relationship in front of everyone. Charlotte was leveraging her connections, pulling David into high-profile projects. To outsiders, they seemed like a power couple on the rise, but cracks would soon appear in that shiny facade, and in time, the entire structure they were building would come crashing down. For David, living with Charlotte, James wasn't the dream he had envisioned. Yes, the initial weeks were filled with the heat of newfound passion, the thrill of sneaking around stripped away, replaced by a brazen sense of freedom. Yet almost immediately, Charlotte's true nature began to reveal itself. The ultimatum that propelled David into her arms was only the tip of her demanding iceberg. She insisted on monitoring his phone and emails, snooping through his messages. At any hour, I need to be sure you're not lying to me, she'd say with a suspicious glare. The easy laughter and flirtations that once drew David to her now felt suffocating. Charlotte had quickly turned from a sultry mistress into a relentless taskmaster, her needs overshadowing his at every turn. At Redwood Tech Solutions, Charlotte's cunning side became even more pronounced. She paraded David around at staff lunches, ensuring everyone saw them as a unit. Their boss, Mr. Carter Knox, no relation to David, was rumored to be an old friend of Charlotte's father. While Charlotte boasted of protecting David's position in the company, she also claimed credit for every success. She'd schedule meetings without consulting him, pushing him into more responsibilities, while hogging the spotlight. At home, tensions ran high. David found it difficult to relax in the sleek downtown apartment Charlotte leased. He missed the warmth of the house he and Sarah had once shared. Charlotte's tastes ran extravagant designer furniture, imported wines, weekly parties that served as schmoozing opportunities for Redwood City's corporate elite. David often retreated to the balcony, longing for the unpretentious evenings of pizza and board games. With Sarah one evening, Charlotte cornered him in the hallway after he returned home from an especially grueling day. He'd missed one of her texts during a conference call, and Charlotte treated it as a grave offense. "If you're ignoring me already, David, maybe you're not as committed to this relationship as you said," she snapped. The conversation spiraled into a heated argument. She accused him of still pining for his pregnant wife. He, in turn, argued that he was simply exhausted and needed space. Charlotte ended the night locked in the bedroom while David slept on the couch. As the weeks wore on, David found himself constantly on edge, fearful that failing Charlotte's expectations would jeopardize both his job and the precarious relationship he'd sacrificed so much to maintain. Meanwhile, the guilt about abandoning Sarah and the baby gnawed at him like a persistent ache he couldn't soothe. He thought about calling Sarah just to hear her voice, yet he never did. Perhaps he was too ashamed to face her, or perhaps he worried Charlotte would find out. Regardless, each day that passed built a thicker wall between him and the life he once had. What David failed to realize was that Charlotte's controlling behavior was only the beginning. The woman who had forced him to choose between her and Sarah wasn't satisfied with mere compliance. She wanted utter devotion, and when devotion wasn't enough, she would ensure his downfall in the most spectacular way possible. Back in the small, cozy house Sarah refused to abandon, life was slowly, painfully moving forward. Her belly grew more pronounced, and with every kick or flutter from the baby, she felt renewed determination. Harriet returned to Montana, but promised to come back when Sarah neared her due date. Caroline Burns continued to visit, and as Sarah fell into a steady routine, freelance marketing by day, soothing self-care by night, she felt her sense of identity strengthening. The Redwood City community rallied around her too. Mrs. Harmon from next door brought homemade lasagna every Sunday. Dr. Monica Lee texted regularly to check on Sarah's health, ensuring she attended prenatal appointments. She also connected Sarah with a prenatal exercise group at a local community center, where she met other expectant mothers with their own stories. Sarah found solace in hearing about different journeys to motherhood, some equally fraught with personal challenges. In those shared conversations, Sarah realized she was not alone. During a casual lunchtime chat in the community center's garden, Sarah met Amanda Nguyen, a software developer and single mother of 2. Amanda offered to review Sarah's resume and pass it around her tech network. "I know Redwood Tech Solutions has a bunch of sister companies," Amanda said. "Who knows, maybe you'll find a more stable job with better benefits. Don't hesitate to email me." It was the first time Sarah considered a full-time role again. Though she appreciated her freelance work, she needed health insurance and a reliable income for the baby's future. In a matter of days, she was scheduling interviews with tech startups across the Bay Area. Gratefulness welled up in her each time an opportunity arose, reminding her that even in the wake of heartbreak, a path forward existed. One evening after a particularly good interview, Sarah felt a wave of optimism she hadn't experienced in months. She turned on her favorite jazz album, lit a scented candle, and let the gentle melodies fill the living room. The baby seemed to respond, giving small kicks, as if dancing along. Sarah held her belly and whispered, "I promise I'll do everything I can to make a good life for us." That night, she dreamed of a future where she and her child were thriving, filled with laughter, simple joys, and possibly, when she was ready, new love. She woke up with tears in her eyes, but a smile on her lips, feeling a deep-seated certainty that she could endure David's betrayal and build a meaningful life on her own. Sarah was unaware, of course, of the turmoil unfolding in David's world. She didn't know about Charlotte's controlling nature or the daily arguments wearing him down. She was only aware of her own heartbreak and budding resilience, forging a steady path ahead, one that might eventually leave David Carter a footnote in her story if karma didn't intervene even sooner. At Redwood Tech Solutions, whispers about David and Charlotte grew louder. Discreet glances turned into open speculation. Some employees admired Charlotte's bold ambition, while others found her ruthless tactics distasteful. Even Mr. Carter Knox, the boss, who was initially amused by their public romance, grew wary of Charlotte's methods. One afternoon, a high-stakes presentation to an international client put Charlotte's cunning on full display. She insisted on taking sole credit for the strategic outline David had spent nights perfecting. Standing at the front of the sleek conference room, she delivered a polished pitch, practically elbowing David out of the spotlight. Once the deal was signed, she battered her eyelashes at him in front of everyone, as though he were a mere accessory. David's face burned with a mix of humiliation and anger. Matthew Thompson, the remote employee from Glendale, Arizona, had traveled in for the meeting. Afterward, he approached David, genuine concern etched on his face. "Hey man, I've worked with you for years. I know how much effort you put into that presentation. Don't let her snatch all the recognition." David forced a tight smile. "I'll talk to her later," he replied, but the words felt empty. Confronting Charlotte had become an exercise in futility. Each time he tried to assert himself, Charlotte twisted his concerns into accusations of disloyalty or threatened to withhold her influence, which she claimed was keeping him employed. The fear of losing his job, and with it, the precarious financial stability he still clung to, kept him silent. Behind the scenes, a bigger problem brewed. HR policies at Redwood Tech frowned upon inter-office romances, especially ones that sparked negative gossip. Several employees filed anonymous complaints, citing favoritism and conflicts of interest. Charlotte remained convinced she was untouchable because of her father's friendship with the boss. But Redwood Tech Solutions was a publicly traded company, and even old friendships had limits. The tension reached a breaking point after a disastrous mistake. Charlotte neglected to file critical paperwork for a big contract, resulting in a costly delay. In a frantic bid to save face, she blamed David in front of their department head, Ms. Lords Hastings. He was supposed to check the final documents, Charlotte alleged, eyes widening in feigned innocence. Ms. Hastings turned to David, who was blindsided by the accusation. "How could you do this?" he hissed at Charlotte, once they were alone in a hallway, the hustle of employees rushing past them, his fists clenched at his sides. "That was your responsibility? You know it." Charlotte shrugged, eyes cold. "Better you than me. We both can't take the fall." She walked off, leaving him with the sinking realization that he was a pawn in her game, a disposable tool she'd sacrificed to preserve her own image. Meanwhile, Ms. West, Hastings launched a formal investigation, collecting testimonies and emails. As the walls started to close in on Charlotte's empire of half-truths and manipulations, David found himself stuck between loyalty to the woman who had upended his life and a desperate desire to salvage his own career. Little did he know, Redwood Tech's unraveling scandal was just the beginning of the karmic reckoning that was about to unfold. While tension mounted at Redwood Tech Solutions, Sarah's life was beginning to blossom. She received a formal offer from a small but promising marketing firm called Coastline Innovations. The company prided itself on a supportive environment for working parents, and Sarah was relieved to see a benefits package that included robust maternity leave and healthcare. With some trepidation, she signed the contract, all too aware that she was stepping away from the last vestiges of the life she'd built with David. One crisp Saturday, Sarah attended a baby shower. Her friends organized. Balloons floated around the living room, pastel blues and yellows brightening the space. Caroline Burns had baked a vanilla cake adorned with the words, "Welcome Baby Carter," in frosted cursive. Harriet Reeves had mailed a care package from Montana filled with handmade baby blankets. Even Dr. Monica Lee stopped by to share in the celebration. Joy danced in Sarah's eyes, though a pang of sadness flickered whenever she remembered David wasn't there to witness these moments. Yet the warmth of her loved ones reminded her she wasn't alone. Tearing up, she thanked them all, promising to pay their kindness forward someday. "You already are," Caroline said, giving Sarah's hand a squeeze. "Just look at you building a new future for your child." Meanwhile, Karma was weaving an intricate web around David and Charlotte. Unbeknownst to them, Ms. Lords Hastings had uncovered enough evidence to suggest Charlotte had repeatedly misrepresented her contributions on major projects. Emails David had sent, time-stamped with attachments and detailed notes, showed he was the one pulling the weight. Charlotte had been signing her name to his work. When Miss Hastings approached Mr. Carter Knox with this information, the boss grew visibly uncomfortable. Friendship or not, Charlotte's actions were placing the company at risk. Even Redwood Tech Solutions' board of directors began to murmur about the negative publicity swirling around the office. Romance. The HR complaints kept piling up, painting a picture of favoritism and unethical behaviors. Charlotte sensed the shifting winds. She tried to intimidate Miss Hastings into dropping the investigation and cornered David into backing her story. By this point, David was mentally and emotionally drained, questioning every choice he'd made since he first betrayed Sarah. Late one night, David lay awake next to Charlotte in their upscale apartment, the city lights flickering through the window. He recalled his early days with Sarah, her laughter, her gentle understanding. She was carrying his child, and he'd abandoned her for this suffocating liaison. Closing his eyes, he found himself whispering, "I'm sorry, though," to whom he wasn't entirely sure. Soon enough, the seeds of karma would sprout, and the real consequences of his and Charlotte's actions would become impossible to ignore. And while David wavered between regret and fear, Sarah was forging ahead, cultivating a life that had no room for deceit or half-hearted love. The day David's world truly began to collapse was oddly peaceful at the start. A gentle fog blanketed Redwood City in the early morning, muting the usual bustle of traffic. He arrived at the Redwood Tech Solutions office, feeling uneasy, but determined to confront Charlotte about the growing investigation. If he allowed her to pin her failures on him, he'd be the scapegoat in a scandal that was escalating. He found her in a glass-walled conference room, scrolling through her phone with a smug grin. Without waiting for an invitation, he walked in and shut the door. "We need to talk," he said in a low, urgent tone. Charlotte looked up, her eyes narrowing. Before David could voice his frustration, the door opened again. Miss Lords Hastings stepped inside, followed by Mr. Carter. "Knox." "Good morning," Miss Hastings said, her face set in a grim expression. She laid a folder on the conference table. "We have some serious matters to address." Charlotte's smile vanished. David's stomach lurched. Mr. Knox cleared his throat, flipping open the folder. He began reading from a document detailing allegations of manipulation, falsifying contributions, and creating a toxic work environment. Emails, timestamps, and statements from co-workers substantiated these claims. It was clear that the evidence pointed to Charlotte as the chief architect of unethical behavior, with David cast as either her unwitting accomplice or victim. As Mr. Knox finished, Charlotte let out a mirthless laugh. "You can't prove any of this," she snapped. "Who do you think you are coming after me? My father and you are old friends. Carter." Miss Hastings pursed her lips. "We have enough to recommend immediate suspension." Charlotte. "Your father's friendship doesn't negate the rules or the board's decision." David stood there speechless. His first instinct was relief that the truth was surfacing, but as Charlotte turned her gaze on him, fury blazing in her eyes, his pulse pounded. He knew she would blame him. He wasn't wrong. "You," she hissed, stabbing a manicured finger in his direction. "This is your doing. You threw me under the bus, didn't you?" Mr. Knox sighed. "David, you'll need to step out so we can discuss the next steps with Charlotte privately." The implication was that David's employment hung in the balance, too. Shaken, David left the conference room, hearing Charlotte's heated accusations behind him. He had never felt so unsure of where he stood. Outside, employees milled around, clearly aware something significant was unfolding. David locked eyes with Matthew Thompson, who gave him a sympathetic nod. It struck David like a thunderbolt. If he had stayed loyal to Sarah, none of this might have happened. He might still have a stable life, a baby on the way, a future free of shame. That evening, David walked out of Redwood Tech Solutions with a notice that his position was under review. He was effectively on probation. Pending the final decision of the HR investigation, Charlotte received a suspension, with the strong likelihood of termination. The relationship they'd gambled everything on was imploding under the weight of duplicity and greed. Karma had started the domino effect, and just as each tile set the next in motion, there was no turning back now. That same evening, Sarah found herself at the local grocery store, carefully selecting produce, while managing a persistent wave of fatigue in her legs. She was now entering her third trimester, her belly prominent under a loose-fitting sweater. People smiled at her in that gentle way they often do with expectant mothers. She returned their kindness with a quiet gratitude. Every day she felt more certain she could raise this child on her own. She had just turned into an aisle to grab some prenatal vitamins when she nearly collided with David. They both froze. It was the first time they'd seen each other in months, face to face, without warnings or orchestrations. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. David, looking haggard and worn, seemed just as startled. "Sarah," he managed, in a breathless whisper. His eyes flicked down to her baby bump, then back to her eyes filled with guilt and regret. He looked thinner, the dark circles under his eyes betraying a man who hadn't been sleeping well. Sarah clenched the shopping cart handle, her mind flooded with memories and anger. She wanted to walk away. No. She wanted to rage at him for leaving her in her most vulnerable state. But she found herself standing still, locked in this moment. "Hi, David," she said, voice trembling slightly. Her expression remained guarded, tears threatening to rise but kept at bay. "How are you?" It was a simple question, yet it carried the weight of heartbreak and betrayal. David's eyes glistened as he reached out to touch the edge of her cart, then hesitated. I'm not good," he admitted, swallowing hard. "I've made such a mess." Sarah couldn't deny a sudden rush of vindication. She softened only enough to keep her composure. "I'm sorry to hear that," she replied, though her tone left little doubt that she was thinking. "You did this to yourself." He asked if they could talk, grab a coffee. Perhaps Sarah's first instinct was to say no. What good would it do to revisit old wounds? But she also remembered the baby growing inside her. One day that child might want to know about their father. Perhaps a calm conversation could bring closure, or at least clarity, reluctantly. Sarah nodded. Not now. But maybe later this week, she said, scribbling her new phone number on a slip of paper and handing it to him. Message me and we can arrange something. Her voice was measured, giving nothing away. David clutched the paper like a lifeline. Thank you, he murmured, stepping aside as she pushed her cart forward. Neither spoke another word, but as Sarah walked away, she felt the tension in her shoulders lift slightly. She was no longer afraid of facing him or the pain he'd caused. In fact, she was ready to confront whatever answers might come her way. They arranged to meet at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of Redwood City. Sarah chose a table in the corner, away from prying eyes. She wore a soft grey maternity dress that showcased her bump, while David arrived in a worn jacket, looking as though he'd aged years since she last saw him. Nervous energy crackled in the air. After ordering tea for Sarah and black coffee for himself, David took a shaky breath. First, I want to say, I'm sorry, I know. It's not enough, but I need you to know I truly regret leaving you. Sarah studied him, searching for sincerity in his voice. You left me when I needed you most. You lied, cheated, and you chose another woman's ultimatum over your own child. Her words came out steady, though tears threatened to spill. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind, but nothing prepared her for the emotional weight of it. David nodded, pain etched into his features. He told her about Charlotte's manipulations, how the affair escalated beyond his control, and how he believed he was saving his career by going with her. He talked about the current HR investigation, his probation, and Charlotte's likely termination. I've lost almost everything, he said, voice trembling. And I'm terrified that includes you and my child. Sarah, hand resting on her stomach, felt the baby shift. Part of her wanted to lash out in anger. Part of her wanted to comfort this broken man. But she had learned to prioritize herself and her unborn child above all else. So she asked the hard questions. Are you expecting forgiveness? Or are you hoping I'll give you another chance? He swallowed. I just want to be there for my child. If I could turn back time, I would. Sarah, I know I don't deserve it. But if there's any way, his voice cracked before he could finish. His eyes pleaded with her, glistening with tears he wouldn't allow to fall. Sarah inhaled deeply, steadying her voice. David, I don't know what our future looks like. I can't trust you right now, and I can't pretend everything's okay. But I won't deny you the chance to be a father, provided you're serious about changing and supporting this child. Relief washed over his face, though he also understood the gravity of her words. I want that, he whispered. I'll do whatever it takes. They spoke for another hour, mostly about logistical matters, doctor appointments, child support, parenting arrangements. When they finally parted, Sarah stood and David tentatively placed his hand on her stomach. The baby responded with a kick, startling him into a soft gasp. Sarah didn't move away. But neither did she smile. She simply looked at the man who had broken her heart and accepted that, while forgiveness might be possible in the distant future, forgetting was not. As she walked out of the cafe, the final seeds of karma were already in bloom, leaving David to pick up the pieces of a life he'd shattered. Days turned into weeks. As Redwood Tech Solutions concluded its investigation, the board decided to terminate Charlotte James for gross misconduct and unethical behavior. David, albeit complicit to some degree, had a history of good performance that saved him from immediate dismissal. He received a demotion, instead losing much of his salary and status. He would remain on probation for a full year with tight scrutiny over his tasks. Charlotte's fall from grace was swift and brutal. Her father's friendship with Mr. Carter Knox couldn't override the public fiasco she had created. News of her unethical conduct spread through Redwood City's tech circles, making it nearly impossible for her to secure another position at a comparable level. One evening, Charlotte showed up at the apartment they shared, now littered with half-packed boxes, demanding they move somewhere new, somewhere her reputation wouldn't follow. David refused. "We're done," he said, exhaustion tempering the anger in his voice. "I lost everything for you, my wife, my child, my peace, and you repaid me by throwing me under the bus every chance you got." Charlotte tried to spin it in her usual manipulative manner, but David had finally seen through her. With no reason to stay, she stormed out, leaving him alone in the echoing space. Meanwhile, Sarah quietly persevered. She thrived at her new job with Coastline Innovations, impressing her team with her strategic insights and empathetic leadership style. Her manager, Vanessa Grant, quickly recognized Sarah's potential, hinting that a promotion could be in the cards once she returned from maternity leave. After all the heartbreak, Sarah found purpose in crafting marketing campaigns for community-driven products, a pursuit that resonated deeply with her personal journey. As Sarah's due date approached, she agreed to let David attend a few of her doctor's appointments. Dr. Monica Lee, who knew the entire backstory, maintained professional courtesy, while silently rooting for Sarah's peace of mind above all else. Each visit was tense, but civil. David brought small gifts, onesies and baby blankets, a meek attempt at showing he cared. Sarah accepted them with polite gratitude, setting clear boundaries he could be involved, but on her terms. Every so often, David would confess how much he missed their old life. How he wished he could undo his betrayal. Sarah would offer a sad smile, neither dismissing nor encouraging him. She was still healing, still uncertain if there was room in her heart to trust him again. But she believed in second chances. When it came to fatherhood, she saw it as the only way their child could have a fighting chance at a stable paternal relationship. And so David learned the hard lesson of what happens when selfish desires and fear overshadow loyalty, love and integrity. His betrayal had unleashed a storm of karmic consequence, costing him nearly everything. Now he was left hoping that time and consistent effort could mend at least a fraction of what he had shattered. Sarah's labor began on a warm summer night, the humidity laying thick over Redwood City. Her mother Harriet had arrived days earlier, prepared to usher in her first grandchild. Caroline Burns was on standby for emotional support, ready to drive Sarah to the hospital if needed. But it was David who received the first frantic phone call when Sarah's contractions intensified. She let him know she was going in. He arrived at the hospital moments after Caroline and Harriet had settled Sarah into a labor room. Pale and sweating, David almost collided with a nurse as he rushed through the hall. When he found Sarah, she was breathing through a contraction, eyes squeezed shut. Harriet stood by her side, offering a hand to squeeze Caroline, gave David a curt nod, not unkind, but clearly protective of her friend. Hours stretched each contraction, a wave of pain that brought Sarah closer to meeting her baby David, tried to help tentatively rubbing Sarah's back or offering ice chips. At first, Sarah resisted the comfort memories of betrayal, fueling her anger. But as the contractions came stronger and faster, she found herself clinging to any hand available sometimes. Harriet's, sometimes Caroline's, sometimes David's. Finally close to dawn, The baby arrived, a healthy baby boy with a piercing wail that instantly commanded everyone's attention. Sarah burst into sobs of joy and relief. Harriet and Caroline crying alongside her. David stood at the edge of the bed, tears streaking his face as he looked at his son for the first time. The nurse placed the baby in Sarah's arms, and she gazed at the tiny face that made every hardship, every heartbreak feel surmountable. In the hush that followed, David took a step closer, his eyes never leaving the child. "He's so beautiful," David whispered, voice trembling. "Thank you for letting me be here," Sarah nodded gently, stroking the baby's cheek. "He deserves to know both of his parents. Don't make me regret it," she said softly, her tone carrying both warning and hope. That day, David felt an overwhelming sense of reckoning. His son's birth symbolized the clean slate he yearned for, yet it also highlighted the magnitude of his mistake. He could never fully be the husband he once was, but he could choose to be a better father than the man he'd been. As he held the baby for the first time, he silently vowed to earn that privilege. Word spread quickly among their circles. Friends, co-workers, neighbors. Everyone wanted to celebrate the arrival of baby Carter. Amid the congratulations, a faint but palpable sense of poetic justice hovered. The man who had abandoned his pregnant wife was now forced to confront the reality of fatherhood under the watchful eyes of a community that remembered every transgression. In that hospital room, as the sun's first rays illuminated Sarah's tired but glowing face, a new chapter began. Not one of perfect reconciliation, but of acceptance, responsibility, and the faintest glimmer of second chances. And hovering in the background was karma, its lesson delivered, but its watchful presence never truly gone. The weeks after the birth were a mix of sleepless nights, tender firsts, and countless adjustments. Harriet stayed to help Sarah for the first month, and Caroline dropped by to deliver meals and gossip about Redwood City's ever-evolving drama. The baby named Noah had a surprisingly calm temperament, except at 3 a.m, when he howled for milk like a miniature siren. David, to his credit, showed up consistently. He brought diapers formula and even taught himself how to assemble the baby swing. His attempts at repairing trust went beyond words. He recognized it was Sarah's actions he needed to match. While he was no longer living under the same roof, he made sure to visit every day after work, taking over late-night feedings whenever Sarah allowed. Initially, Harriet watched him like a hawk, but slowly she acknowledged his earnestness. No one pretended it was easy. Old wounds lingered, and Sarah remained cautious, mindful that letting her guard down too soon could reopen heartbreak. She reminded David that forgiveness was a process, not a single event. If he truly wanted to be part of Noah's life, he had to show up with unwavering reliability. No more running away. No more lies, David understood. He brought with him an attitude of humility, each day hoping to prove he was a different man than the one who left her pregnant and alone. Outside of the baby's blissful cocoon, the world continued turning. Charlotte James vanished from Redwood City's social scene, rumored to have moved out of state Redwood Tech Solutions, despite the scandal maintained its reputation, and David, though demoted, kept his job. He was thankful for a paycheck that allowed him to provide financial support for Noah's needs. Sarah resumed her role at Coastline Innovations once her maternity leave ended, balancing spreadsheets and marketing strategies with diaper changes and bottle sterilizers. It was exhausting, but she felt empowered. In a quiet, introspective way, she marveled at her own resilience. The heartbreak that once threatened to consume her had given way to a ferocious love for Noah, and a renewed self-worth, she refused to compromise again. For the first time in months, Sarah felt free from the shackles of bitterness. Yes, David's betrayal had shaken her world, but in the rubble she had found an unbreakable core of strength. Watching David gingerly hold Noah leaning over the crib to whisper lullabies, she wondered if there might be room for compassion, even love somewhere down the road. She didn't know, and she wasn't rushing to find out. For now she was content, living day by day, savoring the quiet joys of motherhood and allowing David to rebuild what he had demolished if he truly was willing to do the work. In that uncertain yet hopeful atmosphere, the final stage of Karma's lesson was revealed. From tragedy and betrayal can emerge growth, and from shattered trust can arise the possibility, though never guaranteed, of redemption. Thank you for joining us on this emotional roller coaster of love, betrayal, and the unrelenting power of karma. We witnessed a husband abandon his pregnant wife under the sway of a ruthless mistress's ultimatum, only to face devastating consequences that threatened everything: his career, his peace of mind, and his future as a father. Meanwhile, a resilient wife found the courage to rebuild her life, embracing motherhood with determination and grace. Through heartbreak and hardship, both learned that actions carry weight and that redemption requires genuine effort and time. If this story moved you, made you think, or inspired you to believe in the strength of second chances, don't keep it to yourself. Please like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more real-life drama stories that remind us of the resilience of the human spirit and the ever-watchful eye of karma. Thank you for watching.